While we record this, millions of Americans are watching the Super Bowl, but 2 Americans are recording the D3 Datacast. That show begins right now.
Welcome back into the D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder, joined as always by Matt Snyder.
How you doing, Zach?
And Matt, I'm doing well. I love the football tie. Very festive as we record on Super Bowl Sunday evening here. So a couple things just off the top. Want to thank everyone who has already clicked the subscribe button here on YouTube. If you haven't and you've been joining us for a while, like what we do, please consider clicking that subscribe button. That helps us. It also helps you because that will put our feed directly into your subscriptions, and you just never know when a special bonus episode might show up. It did last week. We're planning a bonus episode at some point this week. So click that subscribe button. Be ready for when it drops. Because, like I said, you just never know when that bonus episode might drop. We have a big week, Matt. We had our first regional rankings last week. We got our second regional rankings this Tuesday. And then coming up later in the week on a special segment on Hoopsville, we'll get a look at the top 16, regardless of region, as put together by the committees on both the men's and women's side. And that'll kind of give us our look at how they're seeing the very top, the potential hosts perhaps playing out, and a little look at maybe how they're looking at the picture nationally beyond these regional looks that we get. So, Matt, I know we're both excited. Anything in particular that you're really interested in seeing when those top 16s come out?
Just every single year, I'm interested to see how they're going to be comparing winning percentage versus strength of schedule, right? And how does regional ranked opponents factor in? Last year, we had tons of regionally ranked opponents for every team because of how many teams were ranked per region. This year, we'll have fewer. So, how is the committee going to weigh number of regionally ranked wins versus quality of regional ranked wins? Those are always interesting to see. And then just to see how the regions stack up against one another is also fascinating. It starts to give us a look at what the bracket might look like as far as who might host, should geography and everything else hold. So great week ahead. And then the following week, we get conference tournaments. Then we get selection Monday. So it's going to be like a wild finish here of the regular season and then into March.
Yeah, definitely. It really feels like we're going to be rolling here now. And we're going to be getting more into this, just as we did last week. We're going to go region by region, previewing how we feel each of the regions stacks up as a little preview or prediction for the second set of regional rankings. But before we do that, Matt, as we do most shows here, we're going to lead off with your top 25 ballot for this week. And I'll be honest, I'm really hoping for this one we see that you have your list 1 through 25 in alphabetical order.
I'm doing alphabetical top 25 this week.
Yeah.
I should have done that.
Well, it
Yeah,
might be as good a method as any, right?
yeah. Some weeks it is. I didn't think I'd have this ready for the recording, but while you were out gallivanting at Super Bowl parties, while I was combing through regional rankings, you were a little bit late to record, so I got a chance to actually go through my ballot. And so here we are. We get it. The people get to see my ballot. I would say there's not a ton of overall changes from last week. Probably the biggest thing was Middlebury kind of tumbling down. They've had a little bit of a tougher 3-game stretch here, let's say. So they went back down into the teens from my ballot, where they had been up in the top 10, I think, recently. That was one of the biggest changes, I think, across my ballot. Some other teams obviously went up a few spots after that. But that's kind of how things are looking for me going into the kind of stretch run here of the season. For me, the ballot has settled down. I haven't had as much turnover in recent weeks. I kind of feel more comfortable with who maybe my top 15 or 20 teams are, and I don't have as much debate going on in my head about where those teams go. I think it helps that most of those teams kind of won this week as well, and maybe Middlebury being the exception. But yeah, this is how I came down, and was very close to maybe switching back Randolph-Macon and St. Joseph on the efficiency ratings. They became very tight. A few days this week, St. Joseph had been number one, but ultimately I'm kind of stayed the course with Randolph-Macon here. I think they've been putting in good work recently, and St. Joseph as well. I think those are going to be our two favorites. For me, there's actually a pretty big gap between 1 and 2, and then the rest of the field. So I think heading into March, they're going to look like our two favorites when we see those brackets.
Yeah, a couple that I want to highlight here. Number 11, UW Oshkosh. They're one team that entered the season very, very highly ranked. kind of took a while to find their footing. Took a few losses. Some maybe not unexpected, but not super surprising. Some that maybe were a little bit more surprising. But here we are coming down on the end of the regular season. Now, the top of the WIAC is maybe down from a little bit from what we usually expect, but still there's great depth of teams there. And here they completed the season sweep of lacrosse over the weekend and have opened up a 3-game lead at the
Yeah.
top of the WIAC. So regardless of what you want to say about the quality of the top, they have definitely separated themselves, and it's a deep enough team league of at least good teams that to be sitting there 12-1 now, I think is pretty impressive. Um, what do you think about Oshkosh and really the strange season they've had, but here at the
Yeah.
end, kind of rounding it out into form, maybe how we all expected all along?
I mean, I think it's 12 in a row right now for them in the WIAC. So after the early part of January, they've really put it together. And I think I was scratching my head about them as much as anyone. They had losses there over kind of the December, early January period, to Ripon, to Marion, and then they start WIAC play with a loss to Eau Claire. And it's just kind of like, man, is everything falling apart for Oshkosh this year? Um, we saw them early on in the season lose to Calvin and St. Joseph, Connecticut. Now those losses don't look too bad. One was on the road, one was a neutral site. But then kind of that almost Christmas time struggles that they had there over in Marion and against Marion and against Ripon just weren't the losses they should take. But they've figured something out here recently. Like you said, they're now 12-1 in the conference. They opened up a big lead there and I think they're rolling. I think they basically now look as good as we thought they would throughout the season. I don't really know exactly what it was that took them so long, but I think Oshkosh is a force to be reckoned with. They're getting hot at the right time, assuming that they don't collapse here or in the WIAC tournament. We're going to see them in March, I think maybe regardless, and they're going to be as dangerous of a team there as just about anyone here in the top 25 or beyond.
Another one that as I was scoreboard watching a little bit over the weekend, that I thought of is John Carroll. Now I know you had John Carroll in your top 25. They fell out, and you seem to be quite a bit slower than some other top 25 voters, or at least of the ballots that we've seen, to bring them back in. And then I saw their game Saturday. They beat Ohio Northern in overtime, and I thought, oh boy,
Yeah.
here's another kind of game that Matt was looking at as sort of the justification or the reasons you weren't quite comfortable moving them back into the top 25 sooner than maybe some others were.
Yeah, they're obviously a good team. Mount Union's a good team. The computers don't love those two, particularly John Carroll, as much as the human voters do. And to be honest with you, I've had Mount Union highly ranked most of the season. I've now brought John Carroll back into the top 15. When I watch those teams, I don't always know how it works just from the eye test. Now, I'm not mostly an eye test voter. I am hashtag not a scout. I'm not an X's and O's guy. Um, but to me, it just seems like I'm not sure how this all always goes together, but they get the results. They've gotten the results. I think my knock on John Carroll has been some of these other games have been closer than maybe they should be. And now I think, speaking as a Calvin supporter, I see Calvin all the time. They've more recently gone out and taken care of business against the other teams in their conference. John Carroll has gotten the wins, but maybe some uncomfortable wins more recently. Now the OAC is a deeper league than the MIAA, so I think that has some explanation there. But yeah, you just like hate to see them go into overtime against Ohio Northern. Now I don't know that I punished them too much for that this week. I had done my punishing earlier in the season, and I kind of brought them back in at this point. But yeah, those are the kind of things that make me hesitate for them going into maybe the OAC tournament. Now they're going to be fine to make the tournament, but then into the national tournament as well.
Another fine ballot, Matt. Thanks for sharing it with us. And I know there's people that look forward to this opening segment here to see your ballot and how you're thinking about it. But let's move on from that into what we see ahead for this week's regional ranking, starting in Region 1.
Yeah, we're going to do similar to what we did last week. Um, but this week we actually have regionally ranked opponent data from previous. So my apologies for this slide being so big and narrow. Uh, Middlebury had a lot of regionally ranked wins in there. I maybe should have cut that short a little bit, but this is how I see Region One going, and I'm kind of sticking with. Well, we'll go down the list. I think St. Joseph for me is the top spot. You can maybe have a conversation about Middlebury there with the strength of schedule advantage and the regionally ranked opponent advantage. But St. Joseph's regionally ranked opponents, they're 4 wins versus 6 wins for Middlebury. But there's relative quality there too. UW Oshkosh is probably the top team in the region in my estimation. WPI is probably ranked highly in Region 2. Tufts, Babson were in the regionally rankings as well. For me, Middlebury checks in just after St. Joseph. Middlebury has 6 regionally ranked wins and also some good quality ones. Keene State, Williams, and another one against Tufts. So I think we'll see these as the top 2 teams. Um, Maybe the orders flipped. I doubt it will be flipped, but that's a possibility. I think Williams is kind of a clear standalone third team in this region. They do lose a head-to-head currently to Tufts, but I think the rest of their criteria maybe outweighs that, in my opinion. So I would expect to see Williams and then Tufts 4. And then after Tufts, who Tufts has a solid resume kind of across the board, then things get a little bit dicier. We start seeing winning percentages below 700 with Wesleyan and Hamilton. I have Wesleyan 5th, but you could maybe try to construct an argument of them being above Tufts at 4 if you wanted to. There's a strength of schedule advantage there, and Wesleyan has beaten Tufts head to head. Wesleyan also has maybe a stronger regionally ranked win in Middlebury. I ultimately didn't
Middlebury.
Middlebury. I didn't make that move as far as Wesleyan above Tufts, mostly because I think there's a big, that big winning percentage gap there. Once you get to 0.667, you're kind of on the edge of things. So I thought the committee might opt for a more kind of solid across the board resume, the additional regionally ranked win. But I could see that maybe switching places. I'm gonna keep Wesleyan below Tufts, and then I pick Hamilton 6 as kind of another solid resume across the board. They have 4 regionally ranked wins. They have a strong strength of schedule. The .667 winning percentage for Hamilton's a little bit getting on the edge, but compare the resume to Worcester State, who I have 7th, and their total resume looks better with the regionally ranked wins and the strength of schedule. Obviously, Hamilton has a win against Middlebury as well, and that's going to be a good win. Here, the decision is kind of who gets that 7th spot. I picked Worcester State. We last week, we saw Trinity get that spot where we had them just outside. Trinity had a head-to-head win with Colby. Colby has beaten Hamilton. Hamilton has beaten Wesleyan, and Hamilton has beaten Trinity, Connecticut. So you can get kind of a thing of Trinity has beaten Colby, Colby has beaten Hamilton, and Hamilton has beaten Trinity. So you get the triangle that goes back and forth there. And so from that perspective, for the head-to-head between those teams, I think you kind of have to consider that a wash. Ultimately, my decision. I think you could make an argument for Trinity back in that 7 spot. I went with Worcester State again because the 783 winning percentage. They have maybe among those teams 7, 8, 9. They maybe have the best regionally ranked win against Western New England, who's maybe a 4 in their region, versus Trinity's beaten a 5 in Nichols, and Colby has beaten a 6 in Hamilton. So at this point, we're kind of splitting hairs in the criteria a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see again Trinity stay in that spot. But Worcester State could sneak into the rankings, and we could see a NESCAC team fall out. It gets a little complicated at the bottom of the regions here. But I did make a switch compared to the alphabetical regions from last week with Worcester State.
Yeah, and from last week, Trinity sees their winning percentage drop a little bit. Worcester State sees their winning percentage rise a little bit. The picture, changes just that much. Kind of shakes things up from how it looked last week, and so, that's kind of how you get here.
And I showed 10 teams in this region. Only the top 7 will be ranked. Once I got past who I decided my 7th team is going to be, I didn't do a lot of work to determine the exact order. And I didn't go past 10 too much. Emmanuel might be out. It could be Albertus Magnus. It could be Connecticut College. We won't see who that team is, but I didn't spend too much time figuring out who was 10, who was 11 necessarily. So Just
Right.
FYI there.
And as we mentioned last week, as we were going through our predictions for the first regional rankings, if some of the teams that we have in are in fact out, it's likely to come from these other teams that we list here below the line. Although that was not exclusively the case last week
Yeah.
with Marion being completely off our radar and jumping in. But at this point, working with a more complete picture where we actually have results versus regionally ranked to factor in, that was not part of the equation because it was the first regional rankings last week. Hopefully we could at least have our radar dialed in to the point where if we miss something, at least it's to a team who's being shown here.
Exactly. Popping on ahead to Region 2. Um, Region 2 stays pretty similar at the top. Keene State, I think, is going to be in the top spot. Um, WPI coming in number 2. I think they just have kind of more quality resumes across the board. Then we're going to get into kind of maybe a question mark spot with Nichols and Western New England. They've split with each other being in the same conference, so that kind of won't be a factor here. You can see that their winning percentage is identical. Nichols has a maybe slight but meaningful strength of schedule difference, especially being on opposite sides of the 500 mark there. Western New England has an additional regionally ranked win, but Nichols maybe has a slightly better regionally ranked win. That might be kind of splitting hairs because they're against each other. So I thought Western New England was in the 4 spot and Nichols was in the 5 spot, and maybe this week I have them flipped. So really here I was weighing the additional regionally ranked win versus who I thought was number 7 last week, Trinity, Connecticut from Region 1. So Western New England gets that advantage versus Nichols getting kind of a 0.12 strength of schedule advantage. That's going to be tough to see. Who comes ahead in that, especially considering they've split the season series. So I wouldn't be surprised to see either Nichols then Western New England or those reversed. I picked Nichols. I went with the strength of schedule above 500 just to look like um, a more positive resume again across the board. But only one regionally ranked win for Nichols could hurt them. After Western New England, I went with Western Connecticut, number 5. I thought they might have been higher, more like number 3 last week, but you can see even though they have a 913 winning percentage, the 460 strength of schedule is just not playable. 0-2 versus regionally ranked. That's not strong. They had 2 chances against Keene State. They couldn't win either of them. That's it's going to put them in trouble. They're a team in this region I had difficult time pegging. You could make an argument that they're still third. You could make an argument that with a 460 strength of schedule that they should be completely out of the rankings. I think probably they'll end up like in this 5 range. But it'll be really interesting to see kind of what the committee does with them in that 460 strength of schedule. And then at the bottom, this is a region with only 6 ranked teams. I had a hard time knowing who exactly was going to be the 6th team. Babson was the other team that was actually ranked last week. This week, I slid Emerson in. You can see that particularly when it comes to the regionally ranked opponents. Babson's 0-4, Emerson's 2-5. I think the 2-5 is going to look a lot better to the committee and make up for maybe a little bit of that winning percentage difference. Those 2 teams split the season series into NUMAC, so nothing really to gain there. And if you look at Emerson's key wins, they have one against WPI, who's the number 2 team in the region. So I think that will look like a strong win as well. So ultimately, with that total resume, I took Emerson above Babson. But again, you could maybe make the argument for Babson. You could even look, probably we're not looking at Brandeis. They have a lot of regionally ranked games played, but they're only 2-9 against those games. Wins over Rochester and NYU. So I don't think we're going to be going with the 524 winning percentage of Brandeis there, and a team like Suffolk or Mitchell probably not going to factor in if they didn't factor in last week. So it's probably between Emerson and Babson in my mind. I went ahead and made the switch with Emerson, but we'll see what the committee does.
Yeah, we could already see here how things can change week to week because you look at between our predictions here for Region 1 and Region 2, based on last week's regional rankings, you're seeing in the key wins section, wins over Babson, who we have falling out this week, which means when it comes down to the 3rd regional rankings, those no longer factor in as regionally ranked wins. And also like a Trinity, Connecticut, who was in last week, who we currently have falling out. So those are wins that teams may be getting credit for on a resume for this week that if it holds as we are looking at it, that they drop out, then when it comes time to redo this whole exercise next week, those resumes become a little less strong because those key wins fall off.
Exactly. Yep.
And
Yeah,
that's
so
why they talk about it's so important to get the bottom of these regions right, because that's where teams are going to be moving in and out on a
yeah.
week-to-week basis, and that has a big impact on the picture when they go to do this the next week.
And when we did our big Pool C mock selections on Hoopsville last year, I think it was myself, Bob Quillman, Ryan Scott. One of the things we missed on when we were getting down to our final, our picks, was we didn't really spend a lot of time making sure the bottoms of regions were correct in the regional rankings. I think DeSales, um, I think it was DeSales, picked up a bunch of regionally ranked wins of a team or two kind of slipping into the bottom of regions, and it totally changed their resume. So those kind of things make a big difference at the bottom. Even if they don't value those individual wins that highly themselves, getting numbers of regionally ranked wins can make a difference. So important to note who's maybe slipping in and out of regions here. All right, making the jump over to region number 3. This one's going to be another very interesting case of high winning percentages versus high strength of schedules. Um, you know, I think they're going to go with Oswego State, 913 winning percentage against a very nice 543 strength of schedule. They've got 3 regionally ranked wins, but then compare that next to a team like Rochester, 682 winning percentage, which is not strong, but like selectable in a Pool C sense. 640 strength of schedule, 9 wins versus regionally ranked opponents, including a number 2 in a region, Middlebury, who I think was a number 4 last week, Worcester, Case Western Reserve, and several other UAA teams that they've played who have gotten in the rankings. So that's going to be a monster resume when it comes to strength of schedule and results versus regionally ranked opponents. They haven't won all of their games, but they have an opportunity maybe to be kind of a number 1 or number 2 team in the region, just based on the rest of their schedule. I think when you see a strength of schedule that high and a winning percentage that's, just kind of okay, when you have 9 wins versus regionally ranked opponents, I think the committee uses that to say you scheduled really tough, you've won a bunch of those games, you've lost a few too, but we think you are kind of in line with other teams that are regionally ranked, and they might rank a team like that pretty high, especially since they have one of those wins being against kind of like a top 2 in a region type of a team. So really interested to see what they do with Rochester. You could also make a case that maybe they should be behind Utica because of that 682 winning percentage. But I kind of suspect they'll be in that kind of 1 or 2 slot, but are very interesting to see what they do. Then kind of going down the list, I think Utica and Nazareth are pretty solid 3 and 4, or whatever order they come in. Nazareth has lost to Utica twice, so I think that will firm up Utica's position there. Then I went with Cortland and Brockport, who split the season series with each other. Again, a strength of schedule advantage for Cortland, but a winning percentage advantage for Brockport. Brockport has the better regionally ranked win against Oswego State, but Cortland has the additional regionally ranked win, getting 3 there. So kind of interesting to see what they might do. Probably in some order, you'll see Cortland and Brockport there. Then the final spot I gave to Ithaca. Last week we had seen in the alphabetical rankings that RPI had gotten a spot. I thought that was probably the final spot, and we actually had Alfred in, and they were out, and I think they've kind of since kind of maybe fallen out of the picture a little bit. But for me, I don't really see it for RPI this week. Compare them to well, I had Brockport actually sliding in. Compare Brockport to RPI right now. Yeah, RPI has like a 0.18 strength of schedule advantage, but Brockport has almost 90 points of winning percentage, and they also have an additional regionally ranked win and a better regionally ranked win than RPI does. So I see Brockport as in. I see comparing Ithaca to RPI. Ithaca's beaten RPI twice, so I think they're in. Plus, they have an additional couple of regionally ranked wins. So I think that's RPI falling out of this region, and I don't see really a case that I could find for anyone other than these 7 that I have in there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case here at the bottom of Region 3. As you noted, you could go any number of ways, but compare the winning percentages to last week, and all of these teams took losses over the week. So you're seeing decreases in winning percentage, and so as you're trying to compare resumes to how it shook out last week to this week. Now, of course, we're adding in the RROs, but in general, it's like, okay, well, who took a loss, but at least did so in a way that raised their SOS, right? So here you go. Brockport took a loss, so their winning percentage is a little bit less than what it was going into regional rankings last week. But in the process, they've at least managed to raise their SOS from just below that 500 line to above the 500 line. And so they were on the outside looking in last week, but with everyone else around them, not able to improve their winning percentage, maybe they are able to slide in just because maybe the schedule game is playing out just right for them, where at least in the process they were able to increase their SOS. And of course, as you mentioned, RPI was in the regional rankings last week, so those get factored in as RRO wins. But who knows, if it turns out like we have it here where RPI falls out, then like we mentioned with the discussion earlier, that changes the picture again as we go
Right.
through for week 3. So
Yeah.
um, I would say a very volatile situation here, probably everything below Nazareth at this point.
Yeah, I think you could go a lot of different ways with some of those other teams with some of those winning percentages bunched up. The final week or two could prove to shake things up even further. I will say I think St. Lawrence beat was I think both Ithaca and RPI this week, so they made gains on this list. I don't think they were in our kind of top 10 picture last week, and now they are, and
Right.
they're kind of making a push for a spot. But it's really interesting. I guess we had Ithaca in and RPI in. So even though Ithaca had beaten RPI twice, maybe that was already factored in last week. Maybe it was Brockport sliding in. Um,
Yeah.
but their strength of schedule only went up slightly. Their winning percentage was that high last week, and the committee still took RPI over them. Now getting in those regionally ranked wins, I think we'll see their Brockport beating Oswego State into the picture, and I think that's gonna definitely vault them in my mind. So I just can't see kind of Brockport staying on the outside and RPI staying in.
Yeah, beating Oswego gives them the best win out of that whole
Yeah,
group that could be up for consideration at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah. No one south of Nazareth has a win that good, so that'll stand
Right.
out for Brockport. All right, Region Four. Region Four, I think will stay largely the same as far as at least the teams, the named teams above the line. Rowan Stockton at the top, the same two teams I had. I have Montclair State kind of joining them as the third team. Um, DeSales was in that position. I had them dropping down a little bit here. NYU climbing up into the 4 spot, maybe up a spot for them, and then Kane and Lancaster Bible in the same spots I had as them last week. I think now that we add in the regionally ranked wins, we definitely see Rowan and Stockton cement their spots at the top of the region. Rowan has beaten Stockton twice, so that
Yep.
solidifies them above Stockton, and then Stockton has beaten Montclair twice. So I think that's not much of a discussion you have to have as far as what order all those top NJAC teams are in. But then there's a discussion of where do you put NYU, where do you put DeSales? There's a big winning percentage gap between the two and big strength of schedule gap. I gave the advantage to NYU. The strength of schedule is nice. DeSales is kind of barely clinging on there to 500 as they were last week, but NYU's got the 3 regionally ranked wins, including one against WashU, which is going to look very nice in Region 8, I think, as one of the number 1 or number 2 teams there. Carnegie Mellon as kind of a mid region team, and then Roanoke we saw in the regional rankings there. DeSales has only beaten Montclair State, which is a good win, but that's probably not going to carry your resume, especially with a strength of schedule of 500, which is kind of below where the committee likes to see teams be ranked. Their 826 win percentage is nice and is gonna help mitigate some of those concerns. But I see them slotting in just below NYU, although I could see the committee reversing that potentially. Then when you get to the kind of below to sales line, I think we get some more problems with the resumes. Just very few regionally ranked wins to speak of at the end bottom of this region. 0-5 for Kane's not going to look good. 0-3 for Lancaster Bible. Lycoming actually got one regionally ranked win, but it's against Scranton, who was a number 7 in their region, so not a super impressive one, and they have strength of schedule and winning percentage concerns anyway. So I kind of expect these same 7 teams to be ranked in some order here. But yeah, this region gets very thin at the bottom once you get to kind of spot 6 and below.
Yeah, with the 826 winning percentage for DeSales, I think that does more to separate them from the teams behind them than really competes with NYU because of the difference in the results against regionally ranked opponents. I mean, if you want to look at Montclair State, like that probably, maybe that cancels out like the win over Carnegie Mellon for NYU, but that still leaves NYU with credited for beating Wash U and Roanoke. Um, so yeah, the 826 looks nice for DeSales, but yeah, really that does more to keep them ahead of Kane than probably vaults them ahead of NYU.
And once you're looking at Kane and Lancaster Bible, you're not talking about Pool C contention teams here. I don't even know that DeSales is themselves. So, um,
Right.
or NYU is probably only on the fringes of that conversation. Um, Although they had a nice win against on Sunday against Wash U, that maybe really helped them out there. So yeah, this is going to be a thinner
Well,
region after you get those top end jacks. But yeah,
yeah. Well, and when you're talking about Pool C, I mean, the way the process works, if this is how it's going to shake out for NYU to even have a chance, Montclair State would have to get picked
yeah,
ahead of them so that NYU could get up to the table. So,
right.
that's really the importance of these regional rankings and where you stack up in relation to other teams. Because if you're going to need that Pool C, which NYU certainly will, they're right at this point, they're not going to win the UAA. Um, you can't be stuck behind someone
Yeah.
who isn't going to be picked because doesn't matter what your resume looks like if you don't have that chance to get to the table to be one of the 10 one from each region considered at any round for Pool C. Sorry, out of luck.
Yeah, NYU would probably be if they do slot in behind Montclair State by the end of the
Hmm.
rankings. They would be happy for Montclair State to win the NJAC tournament because Rowan and
Absolutely,
Stockton are getting in pretty quick, and then NYU is going to be on the table for a long time and get a lot of
absolutely.
opportunities to compare across the nation and maybe get into the tournament.
Yep. So if you're an NYU fan out there, when that NJAC tournament starts, you are big Montclair State fans.
Yep, definitely. All right, Region 5. Region 5 is pretty simple at the top. I think it's Swarthmore and Johns Hopkins, probably in that order. They split, but Swarthmore has the more and probably better regionally ranked wins and a little bit higher strength of schedule and winning percentage. So just across the board, Swarthmore is a little bit better. Then maybe an interesting call between Alvernia and Catholic. Maybe even throw Widener in that mix, although probably Alvernia is above Widener in my mind. Gosh, Widener has a great win against Swarthmore, though. So in some order, these are the next three teams probably. I went with Alvernia, then Catholic, then Widener, because when I don't know what to do, sometimes I just look for what is a team that is completely inoffensive across the board. And that's kind of what I see in Alvernia. They've gotten two regionally ranked wins, although they're kind of only modest regionally ranked wins. A 550 SOS good and is good, and a 750 winning percentage is good. Catholic, really strong winning percentage, but that strength of schedule is really going to struggle. Not going to really be a Pool C viable strength of schedule there. Three regionally ranked wins. The Mary Washington win is probably the best one. And then Widener with a winning percentage below 700. They have beaten Swarthmore, though, who's the number one team in the region, so that'll look nice. And they do have the best strength of schedule in the bunch. So you could construct arguments for Widener being three, and then Alvernia, then Catholic. Any really order between these three teams, you could probably make a case for, and that would be okay. So this is the order I chose, but I'm really not super comfortable with that. The committee could maybe come out with a different order, so don't be surprised if the middle of Region 5 looks a little different than I have here. Um, you could they'll have in-depth conversations about all of those teams and look at all the common opponent situations and the like, and we'll see what they come out with. But below Widener, I kind of see a little bit of a line in a drop in resume to Muhlenberg. Muhlenberg has a really good win against Johns Hopkins, but that's their only regionally ranked win. Their strength of schedule is solid, but their winning percentage is really struggling at a 652. That winning percentage with the strength of schedule, which is good but not elite, is kind of a challenge. And then I really didn't know what to do with the 7 spot here. I think Muhlenberg is probably in the rankings, but I didn't really know what to do with the 7th spot. I put in Susquehanna, even though they have a 609 winning percentage. Strength of schedule is very stellar at 601. Three regionally ranked wins, including Catholic twice. I think that's going to look nice. The three regionally ranked wins will probably separate them a little bit. Scranton was in the rankings last week, but they don't. Adding in the ROs doesn't really favor them too much. They only have the one win, and it's not as impressive of a win as say Muhlenberg has. So their strength of schedule is not good enough to have a sub 700 winning percentage, looking all that strong. Then Eastern and Hood maybe rounding out what I might see as my top 10 in this region. They both have 3 regionally ranked wins, which will look pretty good, but I don't know that their resume really will compete with, like, say, Susquehanna's strength of schedule, because the winning percentages are kind of in similar ranges. You could maybe make an argument for Eastern staying in the rankings and being that 7th spot. Um, so not really sure what they're going to do. All of those resumes have some sort of problem there, so they're going to have to pick the best of maybe poor options. I came down with Susquehanna though because the strength of schedule is insane, and they still had 3 regionally ranked wins, and we had the absence of particularly good resumes after that.
I think this is the first time we've seen 2 teams from last week fall out of a region with 2 teams coming in. We kind of saw a possibility of the Muhlenberg change coming because we knew that, having the win over Johns Hopkins, but that wasn't necessarily something that could be factored in last week when RROs were not
Yep.
included because they didn't exist yet. But we knew that once they did, that would be a very strong mark on Muhlenberg's resume. And then Susquehanna getting the second win over Catholic, I think, is a big deal. And we knew Catholic would have a strength of schedule problem, so them taking another loss with their winning percentage falling last week from 952 to 913 here this week, that's a bigger deal than most other teams taking a loss because that SOS is very problematic. So they're going to definitely be needing that automatic bid from the Landmark Conference.
Yeah, or hoping that the Landmark Conference tournament gives them enough of a SOS boost to kind of get out of the danger zone. But the danger zone is kind of like in the 6 or the 515 range in my mind. So they're going to have
Right.
a lot of
And
work to
there's
do on
not
the
that.
SOS.
Yeah, and as you look at the other top contenders here, the winning percentages for the other Landmark Conference teams, like there's not that 850 winning percentage that they can
Yeah.
be adding to their SOS. These are other sub 700 winning percentages. So even if they, that's 2 more matchups maybe for Catholic to help bolster that SOS. It's probably not going to be strong enough where it's going to really get them where they need to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a region that's going to have a difficult time with Pool C bids after probably the Centennial Conference runner-up, assuming that either Swarthmore or Johns Hopkins wins that one. Maybe someone like Widener could, with their, since they have a win over Swarthmore, maybe they could build a case still for a Pool C spot. They have a good enough strength of schedule, but you'd like to see that winning percentage for them, maybe creep north of 700 if they can make that happen. But this one might be a little bit thin on Pool C's, I think.
Yeah, if they can close out strong here, make a run like to a tournament final, get that winning percentage boosted, with SOS already in good shape, a win over SWAT, and a couple other RROs. Although, as we mentioned, those can fall off the table here, like Eastern. Maybe that's not to their credit later on, but
True.
yeah, if they can get that winning percentage back towards like 750 plus, then maybe that's on the table for a Pool C for them.
All right, let's look ahead at Region 6. Region 6,
One of our really deep regions.
yeah, this is a great region. I ended up picking the 7 teams that were ranked by the committee last week. So in order, Randolph-Macon, I think, is at the top. I think that's no surprise. They're probably maybe the strongest resume in the country. I expect them to be maybe in that top spot when we see a top 16 reveal later in the week. And then you can maybe make a discussion between Christopher Newport and Hampton-Sydney next. I went with Christopher Newport here having the winning percentage and strength of schedule advantage. Their RROs are probably not quite as impressive as Hampton-Sydney. Hampton-Sydney has the 4th win, and Hampton-Sydney has beaten Christopher Newport head to head. So that is a significant factor. But I kept Christopher Newport despite that head to head. They have like a 50-point winning percentage advantage and like a 12-point strength of schedule advantage. So they have to overcome both of those. Like I said, you could make an argument where Hampton-Sydney is second and Christopher Newport is third. I wouldn't be ultimately shocked if the committee comes up with that. But I think then those are the next 2 teams. Afterwards, we have Mary Washington. Again, they've beaten Hampton-Sydney as well. So if you want to construct the triangle of death with Christopher Newport and Hampton-Sydney and Mary Washington, you are free to do so. But I don't know that we're necessarily going to be comparing Mary Washington to those other two. I think Hampton City and Christopher Newport are a very natural comparison with each other. I think Mary Washington's a little bit more of a stretch, considering that their winning percentage is not in the same range. It's 90 points or whatever below Hampton Sydney. But Mary Washington does have that big win against Randolph-Macon on their resume, so that's going to look nice to the committee. And maybe they do compare those three teams together, in which case, Hampton City doesn't get the advantage really of beating Christopher Newport in that scenario. So that could factor into how they rank these teams. But that those are the teams I see in the top four. Guilford maybe number 5. They have a pretty nice winning percentage. Strength of schedule is fine at 522. They've beaten Emory and Roanoke, who I have as the next two teams. Just 2 regionally ranked wins doesn't really set them apart from the top teams in this region, but it is kind of good enough in a national sense. Emory, really interesting case again with a lot of these UAAs with the high strength of schedule. What do you do with them? They have a sub 700 winning percentage. They do have 3 regionally ranked wins, including Rochester, who we talked about in Region 3, might be maybe one of the top couple of teams there. Case is going to be looking strong in Region 7, and they seem to be continuing to be on a roll. So their resume is probably going to be increasing. So 3 regionally ranked wins from Emory here will look good. So I think that they're probably still in the rankings. And then I stuck with Roanoke. Last week we had Roanoke on the outside, but the committee had them in. I stuck with them as the 7th team and kept Berry just on the outside. Roanoke has beaten Berry. They do have about a 50-point strength of schedule advantage over Berry, but Berry has a big winning percentage gap there, and Berry has the better regionally ranked win against Emory, where Roanoke's lone regionally ranked win is against Whitworth, who, as we're going to see in several slides, is probably not factoring into the Region 10 picture going forward. So they might be losing that one in the future. So again, this is one we guessed wrong last time. Could we possibly guess wrong this time? Is maybe Berry in? Possibly. I don't really see them getting in above Guilford, even though their strength of schedules are closer there. Guilford still has like a 0.3 advantage in the strength of schedule and as good or better regionally ranked wins. It'd be kind of difficult for them to make a case over Roanoke, considering the head-to-head win there. But maybe now we're factoring in the regionally ranked win, and maybe that's close enough to flip them. I think you've got 8 teams here that are good enough to be ranked in many other regions, and unfortunately, one's going to be left out. I had Maryville and Washington Lee as kind of the 9-10, and they have some resumes put together here, but they're not going to be competing with the other 8 teams in this region, I don't think. So I think this is kind of an 8-team race for 7 spots, and that's going to be how it's going to be for the remainder of the last 2 weeks before we get to Selection Monday.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying for quite a while here, leading up to regional ranking season, that there's a lot of depth here in Region 6, and that really plays out in these decisions for the last couple spots. Last week we kind of debated the the Mary Washington versus Roanoke for the last spot, and come to find out that it was actually Berry who we had in that turned out to be the odd team out, and which makes sense if you figure that the committee saw all 3 of those teams, or at least Berry and Roanoke, as close enough where the head-to-head win that Roanoke has over Berry was a deciding factor in getting Roanoke in. Coming up again here this week, there's a lot of really interesting head-to-heads that are going to factor in. You look at Emory and Berry, right? So Emory has a significant strength of schedule advantage, but is the and some good wins in the regionally ranked opponent category. But is that going to be enough to overlook a 230-point winning percentage difference with the head-to-head in Berry's favor?
Right.
I mean, it's a lot easier to kind of wave some of that stuff away when you don't have that direct head-to-head comparison. So very, very interesting, because if the committee gets to the point where we want to do a save and compare between Emory and Berry, Emory has some things that look really strong, but that head-to-head is there, and it's in Berry's favor. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. It was not a good weekend for Emory. They had a chance to really kind of solidify themselves, at least in the middle of Region 6 here, but they kind of got dragged down here, and that's going to put them in a tenuous position here where that head-to-head with Berry could be really problematic for even keeping them in the regional rankings. Who knows?
Yep.
That
Yeah.
seems wild to say for Emory, with just kind of the general feeling about what they are, how they've played this year. But here we are.
Yeah, I think Guilford's probably safe in the rankings. I don't know that they're 5, but I think they'll be in the rankings at some point. Those last
Well, and
3
also
teams,
also have a head-to-head. Guilford also has the head-to-head
yeah,
win over Emory,
Emory and
right?
Roanoke at
So
this
it's
point,
almost
yeah.
like there's a cap here on Emory, and it's
Yeah.
below Guilford, and that drags them into this pot
Yeah.
basically at the line of the edge of Region 6, and they've got a very disadvantageous comparison with Barry based on the head-to-head.
And let's look at what these teams have done since last week. Emory lost about 70-ish points of winning percentage, and their SOS held. Now they get the 3 regionally ranked wins that kind of weren't on the resume last week.
Right.
Roanoke lost uh, about 23 points of winning percentage, and their SOS held, and they gain a very marginal regionally ranked win. Barry lost um, 13 points of winning percentage. They were just on the positive side of 500 last week. Now they're on 0.492 for the winning percentage, and they added marginal gains in the winning percentage, and they gained the regionally ranked win of Emory. So none of these teams really, none of those 3 teams really helped themselves out as far as their performance this last week, or the. I mean, Barry won, but they played against weaker teams, so their SOS kind of got dragged down a little bit. Emory lost. Um, so yeah, very interesting decision. I think you could do Emory, Roanoke, Barry in any order. I wouldn't be surprised if any of those 3 teams are the ones on the outside, or any of those 2 teams are the ones on the inside. Very interesting discussion. I do think, though, that they will look at that regionally ranked opponent column very carefully. Emory having 3 wins there, I think, is going to be one of the things that ultimately keeps them in my mind. Roanoke being 1-5, they've had a lot of opportunities to get more wins. They haven't really come up with them. Barry being 1-2, although this is always the odd situation where if Barry does get ranked, then Roanoke picks up the other regionally ranked win, and then maybe the resume looks a little bit better. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how this one finishes out. It's going to be very interesting indeed to see who's ranked here.
Yep. And similarly, there's a cap on Roanoke here. They've gone 0-4 against the other ODAC teams listed here, right?
Yeah.
So it really sets up this situation where there's Emory, Roanoke, and Barry. Pick 2 out of 3. And no matter who the one left out is, they're going to have a case because there's this triangle where, Barry beat Emory, but Roanoke beat Barry. So there's going to be a very upset fan base here come Tuesday when these regional
Yeah.
rankings are announced.
Yeah.
And I think they'll have a case, but it's just a matter of there's 2 spots left for 3 teams.
Barry's probably going to need their Pool A. Roanoke's probably going to need either the Pool A or to make a run to the ODAC finals to be in Pool C contention. Emory, there's no UAA tournament, so they're going to have to keep their winning percentage up high enough. What is it? 3 games left in the UAA, if that's correct. I haven't really looked at the numbers closely, but they probably want to win 2 out of those 3 to keep themselves in a good position there. Is my guess. So yeah, going to be really interesting to see which of these teams are in tournament position by the end, and which ones are in ranking position for sure.
And this is not even to bring in that if Emory happens to fall out, that has a big impact on
Yeah.
those RRO categories of all these other UAA teams, across the region. So
Yep.
really interesting stuff here at the back of Region 6.
Yep. All right, Region 7. At the top, I have John Carroll 1 and then Mount Union 2. I think their resumes, when you look at winning percentage and strength of schedule, almost identical. Mount Union has one more regionally ranked win than John Carroll does. They've split the season series with each other, but I think John Carroll's regionally ranked wins look a little bit better. They've beaten Wheaton, who I think is probably a number 1 or was last week in Region 8, and they've beaten Mount Union, who I think is a 1 or a 2 here. Mount Union has beaten John Carroll, who's probably a 1 or a 2, and then Worcester, who's I think last week was 3. This week I have him a little further down, and then Whitworth, who was a 7. So basically, a 3 and a 7 versus a 1 and a 2, or a 1, 3, and 7 versus a 1 and a 2. I gave that advantage to John Carroll um, because they also had the .002 strength of schedule advantage. I could see this one flipping either Mount Union and John Carroll, or John Carroll then Mount Union. but these are the top two teams, no doubt. Um, Afterwards, we got the two UAA schools. Case Western Reserve is putting together a really great resume in the UAA. They've been on something of a roll there. I think 857 winning percentage, 545 strength of schedule, 6-2 versus regionally ranked opponents. They've got the head-to-head over Carnegie Mellon. I think they're going to be very solidly the number 3, unless they're the number 1. I think you can start having that conversation. The strength of schedule is sort of in line with those other two. The winning percentage is a little bit lower, but they have a lot more regionally ranked wins. So maybe the committee is going to value that and bring them above. I don't think they're quite there yet, but with UAA play and regionally ranked games abounding there, they have a chance to maybe add to that totals, and maybe we could see Case at the top of this region. Who knows later on? Wouldn't be impossible for them to be number 1 in the region this week. I think they probably check in just below. And I think you kind of have to pair John Carroll and Mount Union together. Wherever they slot, they're going to slot it together. But then, after Case, Carnegie Mellon, 682 winning percentage, have just kind of stayed on that positive threshold of the kind of 2/3, 667 mark. Very strong 604 strength of schedule. Some nice regionally ranked wins there, even though we just talked about Emory, and maybe that one is sliding down in Region 6 a little bit. But the Wash U win is going to look impressive, I think, to the committee. After Carnegie Mellon, I have Wabash. They've also beaten Wash U, which is a good regionally ranked win, and they have a head-to-head over Worcester, which is going to stand out as Worcester is also in the regional ranks here. I think that's going to keep Wabash ahead of Worcester, even though the winning percentage and strength of schedule has a little bit of advantage to the Scots. And then I think the 7th spot in this region is Calvin at this point. They have a win over number 1 in UW Oshkosh, but that's their only regionally ranked win, and they also have a head-to-head disadvantage against Worcester, so I think that's going to kind of keep them behind. I think they're solidly in the 7th spot. I don't think Heidelberg is really challenging them that strongly at this point, but you know, there's a strength of schedule distance there, so I think Calvin in the 7th spot, and then it's probably Heidelberg 8, Shrine 9. We won't see that, but I think that's probably where the committee would have them kind of in a hidden ranking. They've both kind of probably beaten a region number 2-ish type team. Heidelberg's beaten Mount Union, Shrine's beaten UW La Crosse, but Heidelberg also has another regionally ranked win, and they also have a better strength of schedule. So that's kind of how I see Region 7. These are the same 7 teams we had last week. The committee ranked them all. I think they're in a slightly different order this week, but I think they're probably the same 7 teams.
Yeah, going back to the top, I think really the committee will have to decide what's more impressive, beating Wheaton, probably the higher ranked team out of all of them, or beating Worcester and Whitworth. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a quality quantity thing, and that's about all that separates those two at the top, having split and nearly identical resumes. Now, with we'll get to Region 10, but Whitworth was in the region rankings, but looks to be like falling out of the picture here. So that decision making will have a much different look a week from now. But as we stand here, you could have that kind of quality versus quantity discussion if you wanted to. I agree. John Carroll at the top, Mount Union behind them. I think Case is a really solid 3, having emerged in this region. But again, we talked about Emory and the possibility that maybe their position in the Region 6 rankings are a little bit tenuous, and that's going to certainly impact both of our UAA teams here in Region 7. So yeah.
And you mentioned teams.
Yeah.
You mentioned
I was just
teams.
gonna one more thing. Just one more thing I was going to point out with Wabash and Worcester. They have Wabash has the head-to-head advantage right now, but there is still the rematch, the second game of regular season conference play yet to come. So that's either one that could fall into the 1-1 category where it really doesn't mean anything, or Wabash has the opportunity to really solidify themselves with the head-to-head advantage over Worcester.
Yeah, good point. They still have a game to play here,
Yep.
plus conference tournament, so those could shake up
Yep.
a little bit. And earlier you mentioned teams like a Whitworth maybe being at the end of a region and then falling out. Our understanding is that at this point in the rankings, the committee essentially uses their position from a week ago when determining regionally ranked opponents and quality of wins until the final week, in which case they kind of rank and then re-rank sort of based on that to make sure they've captured any changes in the regionally ranked. They don't iterate at this point as is our understanding. So the teams will get credit, we think, for a team who is in and maybe falling out still.
Correct. But whatever credit they would be getting for this week, they would not be getting next week
Yes, right.
with
That
Whitworth falling out. Right.
that
It's
would
all
fall out.
based on last. Yeah. Any credit would be based on last week's rankings. All right. Region 8.
Region 8. This was the one we missed on wildly last week. Marion was in the rankings, and they were not even on our radar. I am again predicting Marion to be out of the rankings. But let's start at the top. I have Wheaton staying ahead of Wash U. Wash U looked like maybe they were going to make a push for the top spot, but maybe the Sunday loss to NYU damaged their resume just enough to keep Wheaton on top. Wheaton will maintain about a 100-point winning percentage margin, which I'll make up for about the 13-point strength of schedule gap there. Wash U does have an additional regionally ranked win, and maybe a couple of better-ish regionally ranked wins, but Wheaton at 4-3 with wins over teams like North Park and Carthage and Calvin, I think will look just fine. So I don't think that Wash U is going to overcome the 100-point winning percentage gap there just yet. But I think Wash U will be the solid number 2 in this region, and they have a nice resume put together essentially on UAA wins, as most of the conference does. That's a lot of their regionally ranked wins are just each other, which is fine. That happens. North Park checking in at number 3. They had a big double overtime win against Elmhurst this week. Big delay with the shattered backboard. But I think North Park is a solid number 3 here. Their resume across the board is very strong. And then things take a little bit of a dip when we get to Carthage. The winning percentages dip below 700, and the strength of schedule is getting even a little bit dicey. Carthage has split with Elmhurst, so there's not really anything to gain there. Elmhurst maybe has a better win. They have beaten Wheaton, but the winning percentage gap there for Carthage, I had put them above, but I could really see that being flipped and Elmhurst kind of being the number 4 team and Carthage being the 5, as I kind of thought they were last week. Carthage does own a win over North Park that Elmhurst doesn't have, so there is a common opponent, maybe slight advantage in there, but maybe that's overcome with the fact that Elmhurst has beaten Wheaton, and I don't know that Carthage has done that. So anyway, that could be Elmhurst 4, Carthage 5 still. You could go round and round on that, but there's definitely an argument to be made there. 6th, I went with Wisconsin Lutheran. I think in my mind, they were solidly number 6. They were a ranked team last week. I believe that is correct. Yes, they were. They do have a win against Marion. That's their lone regionally ranked win. I have Marion falling out, but they were in last week. I have them. If Marion was in Wisconsin, Lutheran at this point has beaten Marion. I think that puts them at 6. A team they've split with is St. Norbert, who I have is there as 7. They have a very similar resume, just a slightly lower winning percentage. They've beaten Wisconsin Lutheran the one time, but that was a split, so I don't think that that's going to be a big advantage. And just outside of the rankings in Region 8, I see North Central, then Marion, then maybe Hanover. But really, I don't think we know what the end of this region is like. Don't know, not super comfortable that has to be St. Norbert there. Could you look at North Central with the strength of schedule advantage and 3 regionally ranked wins? Does that put them more in line for a 7 spot? I just don't really see how this would be Marion again this week over St. Norbert, especially given I think it's been one head-to-head game that St. Norbert won at this point. Oh, no. Marion won the head-to-head. So
Yeah.
there is advantage there. So maybe, I don't know, maybe that is still Marion. I just was trying to see a way to not have the .591 get the advantage there. They do have the win, only the one regionally ranked win, but it is against UW Oshkosh. So who knows? I thought that the resumes were very similar there with St. Norbert, and so then we're asking the head-to-head win and then the quality of that regionally ranked win to do a lot of work there. Maybe it again is still Marion in the number 7 spot. Who knows? But I went with St. Norbert this week, and we'll see what the committee does.
Yeah, this will be tricky because obviously it was Marion last week, and then with the results over this past week, they did see improvement to both their winning percentage and strength of schedule. They've got the head-to-head win over St. Norbert, plus their 1-4 versus regionally ranked opponents. looks better to me than the 1 and 3 for St. Norbert, because the one for Marion is Oshkosh.
Yeah.
Um, so with the difference that St. Norbert has just in winning percentage, I this is where I struggle, because I think if we were going into this blind, I can totally see this, but knowing what we know, with Marion having already gotten that spot last week, I would not be surprised to see them hold on to it here in week 2.
Yeah, it definitely could be. Um, and maybe I was too hasty in pulling them back out. We'll really see. Do they like the fact that Marion has beaten UW Oshkosh, a top team in a region, or who we expect is a top team in a region, and is that gonna just kind of help them carry the day? Right, their number of regionally ranked wins is the same as St. Norbert. Obviously, Marion's is better. St. Norbert has the better strength of schedule. Or Marion does have the head to head win. I mean, yeah, maybe I should have kept Marion. I mean, I think that's I think that's possibly the case.
Right. But of course, St. Norbert did also improve both their winning percentage and strength of schedule over
Yeah,
last week. They were 485 strength of schedule last week. They've gotten it to the even 500, and you could talk about that 500 mark being a psychological
yeah.
barrier. So who knows? I mean, you could cut it either way, but
Hmm.
um, I, the fact that it was Marion last week, I think that probably carries a lot of
Yeah.
weight, that it very well could be Marion still this week.
And if the only thing that maybe would be in St. Norbert's favor, and I don't know if the committee thinks like this, but if you thought about any sort of hard cutoff lines of like a 667 winning percentage or a 500 strength of schedule, St. Norbert's not below any of those lines, whereas Marion would probably be below a winning percentage hard cutoff line. And again, I don't know that they really think of that. Last week,
Right.
I don't think we had a team that wasn't below one of those lines in one area, and so maybe they went with
Right.
Marion. So I think that was
Well,
part of my thought process this week is uh,
yeah.
one of those like is an inoffensive resume across the board, to some degree. But again, if you want to use all the criteria like we should, maybe it is Marion with their Oshkosh win and their St. Norbert head to head and whatever kind of overcoming some of those deficits.
And in last week's data, St. Norbert's winning percentage was 67. So if you think about kind of the 2/3 mark for winning percentage being a hard cutoff line, and the 500 for SOS being a hard cutoff line, they were below one and right sitting on the other. So
Yeah,
that
yep,
could be double disqualification.
that's
So,
possible.
which are not the case this week. So, and that's why we say, just because Marion was it last week and they didn't lose, that doesn't really mean anything, because it's all based on what the data being considered is for that week, and that's always changing, and that's the case for everybody. So they start anew.
This will be interesting to see this week as well. Moving ahead to Region 9. Region 9, we see I kept largely the same as last week, but I think there'll be some interesting talking points here. UW Lacrosse, I think, UW Oshkosh has solidified themselves at the top with their second win over UW Lacrosse. They got that this week. They have a really solid resume across the board in this region. Clearly the best resume in my mind. I kept UW Lacrosse second, although you could maybe make a case for Carleton there. UW Lacrosse has the better strength of schedule. Carleton has the better winning percentage. They both have 2 wins versus regionally ranked opponents. In my mind, Lacrosse's were slightly better than Carleton's were, even though they're numerically the same in their different regions. But I think Guilford being in a strong Region 6 was maybe a good region. And I think, you know, Whitewater versus Whitworth, maybe Whitewater was a little better team, but maybe the committee sees those as identical. So you're really maybe just talking about the winning percentage versus strength of schedule difference. In my mind, that favored Lacrosse slightly, but that doesn't have to. Could be Carleton too. Then you take, I think, a pretty decent hit in resumes to Bethany Lutheran. Bethany Lutheran did drop a game this week, I believe, but their schedule strength improved slightly, and they pick up their regionally ranked wins. They had 2 of them, and that's what, for me, kept them ahead of Illinois College. Both the kind of 0.25 strength of schedule gap and the 2 wins versus regionally ranked versus a single win versus regionally ranked, for me, gave Bethany Lutheran a little bit of a better resume. I did have Illinois College 5, then Central 6. Um, Illinois College being a 473 strength of schedule, 474 strength of schedule, that's could cause them problems, and it could see them fall down this list even further. I'm not sure. Um, Central will have an issue of not having a regionally ranked win, which is not going to be great. And looking at UW Whitewater seventh versus UW Eau Claire eighth, Eau Claire has three regionally ranked wins, including one against UW Oshkosh. Those two teams, I think, split the Whitewater and Eau Claire split the season series. So you have to make a winning percentage strength of schedule discussion with those two, and then maybe start parsing regionally ranked wins. I ultimately went with Whitewater having, a resume that's above the Mendoza line across the board, but maybe you could consider Eau Claire with their regionally ranked wins higher than UW Whitewater, and wouldn't really be surprised to see like Central fall out of the rankings without having a single regionally ranked win, even though they have some decent criteria there at win percentage and strength of schedule. So I didn't really know how this region was going to play out. I think Bethany Lutheran is in as they were last week. I think Illinois College is probably in as well. Not sure what order things are going to be in after that. I ultimately kept the same seven that were in last week, but not really confident considering how many. I mean, I feel like this region has a lot of disparate type resumes that could go in any order with high winning percentages, low strength of schedules, teams that don't have regionally ranked wins, teams maybe being at the outside of the top seven that have three regionally ranked wins. Even like St. Mary's has that there. So don't really know how this is going to play out. I'm really interested to see what the committee here does in Region 9. I suspect we will see some shakeup here, and that we did not get the seven correct.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there because last week it was Whitewater in, Eau Claire out, but those gaps between um, those gaps in the resumes have closed.
Yeah.
We'll just see if it's enough for Eau Claire to overtake Whitewater in this week's rankings with those RROs factored in. It may be.
Yep.
Um, and then, yeah, also, you did a good job talking about it's an interesting case between La Crosse and Carleton. It's an interesting case though too because I think it's one of those that could be a potential trap to look at the 2-3 mark for La Crosse and just the 2-0 mark for Carleton. And I think you're correct that the two wins for La Crosse are more impressive. So that gives them the advantage. But I think it's important for the committee to not look at the 2-3 as being more impressive on its own versus the 2-0, because the 5 games played against regionally ranked opponents versus the two. If you start to give them credit for that, that really seems like kind of double counting the strength of schedule advantage that La Crosse has. So I think you're right, just looking more into those two wins to compare them to see who has the better wins. And it does come out in La Crosse's favor, but they do have the SOS advantage already. So I think to look beyond just the two wins that they both have to compare the two is maybe getting into territory where you're kind of double counting strength of schedule.
Yeah, you can get into that case, especially for teams that have a lot of regionally ranked games played and high strength of schedules. You don't really want to give them credit for both of those things on their own. When I look at regionally ranked losses, I don't know exactly how the committee does it. I don't usually factor in a regionally ranked loss at all. I really only give a team kind of a credit for the win, unless they're maybe something like 1-5 or 1-6, where they've played a lot of games, had a lot of opportunities, and haven't come up with a lot of wins. Then I'll start to look at those losses number as a little bit of a negative. You had a lot of opportunities, you didn't take advantage of very many of them, and so that tells me more that you're not a regionally ranked team than you should be a regionally ranked team. I don't know specifically how the committee will look at those losses. Um, in general, I just look at the wins and kind of give them a small bonus for those wins, unless it's a big loss number compared to a small win number. And then I kind of look at that as a not so great thing.
Right, right.
But yeah, I think you broke it down really, really well for Eau Claire and Whitewater. The gaps have closed. I wouldn't be surprised for those to flip, especially given the number 3 there for Eau Claire and the regionally ranked wins. So we'll see there. All right, our final region is Region 10. Region 10 being Texas and Pacific Northwest and Southern California. I think I think St. Thomas being number one is going to kind of stay my pick. Mary Hardin Baylor is closing the gap against them, particularly with 5 regionally ranked wins. I think overall St. Thomas's resume is good enough to be above that, but Mary Hardin Baylor is kind of the one team in this region that's just really piling up more of those regionally ranked wins. They have some nice ones, including a win against the next team, Pomona Pitzer. Pomona Pitzer checking in at third. They own, I think, currently one head-to-head win over Claremont Mud Scripps. Win against Wash U is also nice. So keeping them there. Uh, Claremont Mud Scripps, their SCIAC conference mate, checking in at number 4. And then in my mind, we had a little bit of a delineation mark below Claremont Mud Scripps getting to Texas Dallas. The resumes start getting a little dicier. So you can see Texas Dallas has a strength of schedule on the wrong side of 500, even though their winning percentage at 818 is fairly good. Here we get into the situation where Texas Dallas beat East Texas Baptist, who beat Redlands. So that's one of the reasons I kept those teams in that order. And then you also see those teams descending in winning percentage, but also ascending in strength of schedule as you go along. So it's gonna be something for the committee to play out. Redlands, we saw last week, was not in the committee's rankings. We also didn't pick them, and we were correct there. I have them jumping in. One thing to their advantage is they're going to get 2 regionally ranked wins, and they're going to be pretty good ones. They've beaten St. Thomas, they've beaten Pomona Pitzer. I think kind of unfortunately, Redlands loses the head-to-head battle with some of the teams right around them. But they have 2 nice regionally ranked wins, which I think is going to put them up into the 7 spot where Whitworth was. And I think Whitworth's kind of falling out of the picture here in Region 10, maybe altogether. Not quite sure. But I think that separates those wins really separate Redlands from teams that might also be in the position to be in the picture, like Trinity or like Whitman. They don't have regionally ranked wins anything near as good. And in fact, Redlands regionally ranked wins are better than East Texas Baptist, who just has the one against Mary Hard Baylor, and Texas Dallas, who just has the one against East Texas Baptist. So, not exactly sure what committee is going to do at the 5, 6, and 7 spot. I kind of went, um, in order of the head-to-head victories to kind of round that out. But you could maybe start making a case for Redlands to be the top team because they have the best strength of schedule of those 3. They have the better regionally ranked wins of those 3, and although the winning percentage is the weakest, maybe you figure that those other 2 factors overcome it. So I expect those to be the bottom 3 teams: Texas Dallas, East Texas Baptist, and Redlands, and probably Texas Dallas above East Texas Baptist, but I'm not exactly sure where Redlands is going to slot in there between them or above them.
Yeah, for our SCIAC friends there's still some really, really important conference games yet to be played. CMS still has their second game against Redlands and Pomona Pitzer coming up. So it's kind of like we talked about with Worcester and Wabash. There's going to be some head-to-heads that are going to be really important for helping shake that out. And again, Redlands is another case. I think we saw this coming, irrespective of Whitworth stumbling this past week, based on the data we had and the committee had to do the first regional rankings where there's no RROs to consider. We came up with the same conclusion that the committee had, which was to have Whitworth in that final spot. But we knew looking ahead, once we had RROs to factor in, that likely Redlands would have the advantage of there. It's just that there were certain things in the resume that weren't able to be considered for the first regional rankings that come into play now. And so Redlands kind of becomes an easy pick here to fill that 7 spot this week with the full criteria at our disposal.
Yeah, I suspect there's a good chance Redlands is in the rankings to stay. Wins over St. Thomas and Pomona Pitzer. I think the other teams kind of in those contention for the 4 or 5, the 5, 6, 7 spots in the region aren't going to be able to put together that type of a resume largely. So I would expect that Redlands, is going to be in the mix here, and would be surprised for them to fall out. But like you said, some big games ahead. If they take some losses, who knows what's going to happen exactly. All right, that's it for the regions. We are going to go ahead
100%.
to our picks. You think we got 100% this week? All right, so now we moved over to the picks review slate. So taking a look at last week's picks, I finally had a little bit of a better week this week. First game was York, Pennsylvania, -5 at Stevenson. Zach, you had picked this correctly. YCP covers. You get that one. The next game in the MIAC, St. John's was +2.5 against Carleton. We were both on the Carleton side. St. John's led this for most of the way, and then Carleton kind of came back and ended up covering this one. So we both get this. That was kind of an exciting game there. Carleton getting the
Very
big
good game.
win.
Yep.
Next up, the computer liked SUNY Oneonta by 5 points at home against Brockport. You had gone Brockport. I went with Oneonta. I get that one. And then in the battle of some of the Penn States, we had Barron versus Altoona. Barron was +8 on the road. Penn State Barron covers that one by a point. They lost by 7, but they covered the computer's line there. So I
That
get
was an
that one.
overtime game as well. There.
Okay, overtime. So yeah, big thriller out
Two
there in Pennsylvania.
overtime games.
And then the D3 Datacast game of the week, Texas Dallas at Mary Hardin Baylor. We had both gone with Mary Hardin Baylor as the 4-point favorites at home, and they end up covering that one, getting a big win in what's a tight ASC race. So Mary Hardin Baylor maybe with the slight edge now in that conference race. That's going to be a big conference tournament to watch. We both get that one, and I think we have exciting things going on down in Texas. So that brings us to Zach. You had a 3-2 week. You're 32-33 overall, nearly at that 500 mark. I was 4-1, and I stretch a lead out a little bit to 34-31. So a tight finish as we go into the final week of the regular season before the conference tournament. I don't think we've quite decided if we're going to have a conference tournament week slate or not. We're going to have to look at what the schedule looks like. I think we'll probably find a way to make some picks there. So we'll see. But as of now, I'm heading in toward the finish with a 2-game lead over you, Zach. So big week coming up for both of us. And that brings us on to this week's pick slate, week 15 already. Man, we're getting down toward the end. First game up is Muhlenberg. The computer likes them. The computer likes Ursinus as 2-point favorites at home against Muhlenberg. Zach, who do you like in this game?
I'm going to go perhaps against my better judgment here and go with Ursinus. Muhlenberg did win the first meeting, and they also probably have the best win of the two of the year over Johns Hopkins, but I will take Ursinus at home.
Okay, I'm going to go the other way with Muhlenberg. I think both of these teams have had some strong results, but I think you're right. Muhlenberg has maybe had a couple of stronger results throughout the season. So just the 2-point road dog, I'm going to take Muhlenberg here. Game number 2, the computer has Dubuque as 5.5-point favorites against Loras. Zach, who do you pick here?
Well, I may still be influenced by some preseason expectations here, and but the number's getting a little higher, but I'm still going to go with Dubuque on this one.
Yeah, for me, this is a pretty large number, and I don't see that big of a spread between these two teams myself. Dubuque was obviously, like you said, more of a preseason favorite in that conference. I think Loras has played really well at times through the season, so I'm going to go with Loras. I think 5.5 is just going to be too much. Maybe Dubuque ultimately wins, but I like the cover here. The third game is going to be a big one in the Skyline. Yeshiva 5-point underdogs on the road at Farmingdale State. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, Farmingdale's probably been the biggest stumbling block for Yeshiva over the past couple years, but I think it would be a disappointment if Yeshiva wasn't within 5 at least here. So put me down as a member of Max Nation this week.
All right, going for the Max. I'm also going for the Max for similar reasons. I think they're relatively rolling in the Skyline right now. I think they're looking to build a resume that's going to give them home court advantage. I think that's still up for grabs, if I'm not mistaken, in the Skyline. So I'd like maybe the Max to win outright, definitely to cover the 5 points. Big CCIW battle. These games are always big. Wheaton, 1-point favorites on the road at Elmhurst. They finally got that new backboard up at Elmhurst. Hopefully no shattered glass. We see Ocean Johnson. Who do you like in this game, Zach?
Yeah, this is a revenge game. Elmhurst got Wheaton in the first one, but I'll take the Thunder here to get their revenge. It is a road game, but that's not much of a road game between Wheaton and Elmhurst. The distance between the schools there. So
Yeah, so you're taking Wheaton. I will also go with Wheaton. I think they have a lot to play for as far as their position in the regional rankings, trying to keep Wash U behind them, let's say. Just trying to keep their lead in the CCIW. If North Park's going to make a surge, I don't know if that's has been decided yet or not. But 1 point for Wheaton here. This is a game they should win and should cover. Elmhurst has been an interesting team to me all season. They'll play a game where they'll look like they can beat anyone, and then they'll play a game where they look like they can just about lose to anyone. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think they're a good team. They've actually, despite their record, have been kind of on the fringes of my top 25 radar for most of the season. I had them highly ranked early in the year and have dropped them back. They haven't ever kind of quite made that push through. Obviously, losing the heartbreaker in overtime to North Park this past weekend after the shattered backboard incident had delayed that game. Um, so Elmhurst just really hasn't quite been able for me to kind of put together those types of wins. So that's why I like Wheaton in this one. And then going ahead to our game of the week is going to be a big one in the UAA race, potentially with Case Western Reserve coming to Wash U. Case is 3.5-point underdogs on the road. But Zach, this is your call.
Yeah, I'll take the 3.5 here with Case. I think Case probably doesn't get the due they deserve for being really one of the top offenses in Division Three. I mean, they put up some big point totals, but they do it very efficiently. They're among the offensive efficiency ratings leaders. So it might be hard to be a UAA team and be under the radar or not quite getting the credit you deserve. But after a pretty soft non-conference schedule, I think Case fits that bill. But they've been very impressive. That offense is top notch. I will take Case.
Yeah, I'll go against you here with Wash U. I think this will be a great game. Um, I felt like Wash U had definitely been playing like the best team in the UAA. They stumble on Sunday, but I think they'll find it again at home against Case. This is going to be a big game. There's no tournament in the UAA, so you got to win the regular season. WashU is going to want to solidify their position there. I think they're going to be coming out hungry to rectify the Sunday loss, and then also be looking to put some distance between them and Case in the standings. So I'll take WashU 3.5 points. I think it's going to be a good game, but I think WashU can cover this one in addition to getting the win. So that is picks, and we will move on to the mailbag. Zach, do you have the first question?
First question came via Twitter from Drew Latrenta. And Drew asked about doing a deep dive on Region 8. It says, interesting to try to deep dive between Hanover, Marion, and North Central, and maybe even Manchester at the bottom of Region 8. All seem similar this week. And, this was probably the biggest outlier or shock to us when the first regional rankings were announced, when Marion got that last spot in Region 8, and they weren't even really on our radar. I know earlier in the episode we talked about Region 8, so hopefully that counts as the deep dive. But, after that first set of regional rankings, I was thinking about it a little more just to try to figure out how they came up with Marion. And it seems like maybe you take a whole group of teams and you start doing individual matchups where you can head-to-head matchups and weed it out from there. North Central's mentioned here at the time of the first regional rankings, they were 0-1 to Illinois Wesleyan. So maybe they lose, drop out of consideration based on the head-to-head with Illinois Wesleyan. And then you get to Illinois Wesleyan lost to Oshkosh. Marion had a win over Oshkosh. And I think that kind of line of thinking is how you end up with Marion taking that last spot. But who knows?
Yeah, that, like we said, wasn't really on our radar. I think you summed it up properly. I think probably once you start comparing teams to each other, then you start looking for what's going to separate themselves. And maybe it was the win against UW Oshkosh that gives Marion the resume boost there. So that's going to be a very interesting one to follow in these next couple of regional ranking sets officially from the NCAA. What was going to happen in that last spot? I think there's several teams that could slide in and out of there, and whoever ends up there when the music stops, could provide resume boosts to the teams they've played. But yeah, hopefully in our Region 8 talk, we've kind of talked about the bottom of the region there. And, I don't know if we're going to come up with the right answer either, but it's definitely an interesting spot to watch for how shallow that region gets after the top, 4 or 5 teams or whatever. So yeah, definitely an interesting one to watch. Next question.
Next one also came in on Twitter. This from Dan Vandestreek, who apparently has a reputation of having a good eye for jump shots. And so he asks if we have a favorite and also one currently on the roster. And we'll take this from the Calvin perspective, being Calvin fans and that being a connection we have with Dan there. So Matt, assuming you interpreted this the same way, just in terms of the prettiest Calvin jump shooters, do you have initial thoughts?
Well, one player who's been consistently knocking down shots recently is Owen Varnado. He's been the kick out 3-point, making 2 or 3 a game very consistently. I think on the year he's shooting, I don't know, 45, 46%, or maybe that's conference games only. But he's been becoming one of Calvin's more reliable outside shooters. So from an effectiveness standpoint, Owen is my new favorite. I think maybe from like a classically pretty looking jump shot, I might go with Logan Van Essen. I think when he takes a nice jumper, whether it's a 3-pointer or like an elbow jumper, he's got like good elevation, nice form, and a good looking shot. And he's like one of the best probably mid range shooters on Calvin's team in my opinion. And he also has just a nice looking jump shot, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking some similar names. So I agree with you. Varnado doesn't necessarily have like it's not a wonky looking jump shot, but not classically pretty. But when you're 6'6" and you have a high release,
Yeah.
there's not really a normal Division III wing who's going to challenge that shot, right? He's getting that off from a high release point. Um, so yes, I also thought of Van Essen. I'll also um, I was thinking a little bit more historical. Certainly, there are Calvin basketball fans that have a longer history than we do. So I was thinking like a Matt Veltema had a real just kind of smooth looking 3-point shot. So he was one I thought of.
Lefty.
Yep, yep. But another one to throw in the mix for this year is Matt Ambrose. He's one of those guys that just it's really fluid. When it leaves his hand, you always think it's going in. And he's been shooting it a little bit better this year so far, more recently too.
Yeah.
So
It's been nice for Calvin's offense. The last 10 games, I think they've had an improvement. The 3-point shooting has been one of those improvements. And having a guy like Ambrose or Varnado or Wrestler who's been able to knock down the open threes when teams come down to double Jalen Overway, that's been a big boost for the Calvin offense. That wasn't really happening early in the season. It's been happening more lately, among other things that have improved the offense as well. But those have been more consistent recently, and that's been, very nice to see.
thanks to Drew and Dan for the questions. And if you have something that you would like for us to address in a future mailbag, you can leave it as a comment on YouTube. You can drop us a line through Twitter or Facebook, facebook.com/D3Datacast, or on Twitter @D3Datacast. And Matt, I think that wraps it up for today's show. Anything else to add or anything you're looking forward to the week ahead?
Another set of regional rankings. It's always fun to see what the committee sees and what might be different than what we just talked about or we think. The top 16 reveal coming up Thursday on Hoopsville is going to be a treat to watch. I think that's going to be a great conversation, a great production, just to see what Dave and others that he has on the show think about that, and then see what the committee thinks. I have numbers that sorts by my fake rating formula. We have D3 Bubble, Drew posting what he thinks. I know Bob Quillman looks through the resumes from his perspective and posts what he has. So it'll be nice to get some kind of firm answers from the committee as far as how they're viewing teams this year. Are we think they're viewing regionally ranked wins the same way? Do we think they're viewing strength of schedule the same way? Who knows? I think we'll be pretty close in our assessment, but it'll be great to see that officially come out.
Yeah, we did pretty well last week. Hopefully we do equally as well this week. We'll see.
Yeah, we did pretty good. Yeah. And hopefully we'll come out with our prediction top 16 episode this week, kind of like a mini episode like we did last week. I'm spoiling it a little bit here, but
Another bonus episode?
That's going to be our plan. But that'll take us out of the episode here, I think. You good? All right. We'll see you guys next week. Good job, team.